Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everybody just a minute to get settled in front of their screens. Be sure that you can see a slide, Saving a Species, in front of you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here with us, and welcome as we celebrate and explore the Mexican gray wolf during 2025 Lobo Week. I am Leila Wetmore. I'm the CEO of the Wolf Conservation Center in South Salem, New York, and I am joined in conversation today by our wolf curator and caretaker, Rebecca Bose, and our director of education, Regan Downey. Lobo Week is a time when we get to shine a light on these magnificent and endangered subspecies of gray wolves that were extinct in the United States until just 27 years ago. When they were reintroduced. And so today we're going to talk about the recovery efforts that went into that and that are continuing to go into that, and share some of our boots on the ground perspective on things, because we are in it in every way. But before we get to the good stuff, I want to just share a few housekeeping tips. We are in a webinar mode today. And so that means that we welcome your communications and questions. You can send us questions in the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to just chat and share something with us, you can do that in the chat. We will be having a question and answer period at the end, and so we really would love to hear from you about this. As you heard at the beginning, we are being recorded, which means that this will be available in about a week and a half on our website for anyone, if you'd like to rehear it or if you'd like to share it with anyone. Now, the work that we do to protect and advance the survival of wolves is fueled by all of us today, our collective action and our commitment. And I can't say thank you enough for being here, for being an advocate for the wolves and the Wolf Conservation Center. And Regan, I am going to turn it over to you now to share a bit about the history and where we're at.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Leila. Hi, everyone. As Leila mentioned, my name is Regan Downey. I'm the Director of Education here at the Wolf Conservation Center. And today we are going to be taking a very broad approach to discussing the history of Mexican gray wolves and how we got to where they are today, both through policy and protections, but also through the work of facilities like ours who participate in captive breeding and education efforts. And then we're going to wrap up by looking forward. How can we continue to create a better world, not just for Mexican gray wolves, but for wolves in general? And then we're going to share some exciting updates about the Wolf Conservation Center as well. So to begin with the history of wolves, I think we would be best to start with where wolves once were in this country. So we're going to rewind it hundreds of years back to the pre-1600s. And wolves at that point lived in every single US state except for Hawaii. And the United States, well, what is now the United States, but at that point was home to gray wolves and red wolves and many different subspecies of gray wolf. But for the purposes of just showing a general range of where wolves were, we've kind of simplified it. So we have gray wolves and red wolves on the map. Gray wolves occupied the western portion of the United States. Red wolves were more a southeast eastern species, by some records actually even extending up beyond where we show on the map, even up to New York, where our facility is located. And the population estimates ranged anywhere from 250,000 wolves up to 2 million wolves. So a lot of wolves, but also at that point, there was a real kind of spirit of coexistence. And wolves were viewed as these animals that were worth coexisting with, and they brought value to ecosystems and to people. But with the arrival of European settlers, there came these ideas of wolves being dangerous. wolves were seen as threats to humans, threats to farmed animals. We'll use livestock interchangeably throughout the program. And they were also seen as a threat to pets. And so people were killing wolves. They were killing wolves. They were moving west, killing wolves along the way, destroying habitat, and then bounty programs were enacted as well. And so people were being paid to kill wolves, and these bounty programs continued for hundreds of years. We're now unfortunately seeing a resurgence of these bounty efforts in certain states, but the pattern of killing wolves did work. It was very, unfortunately, effective, actually. And wolf eradication and eradication of native species in general really took over. So we do have some images that will be sensitive, but these are all images from historical records, and they do shed light on the challenges wolves faced and the challenges we are still facing today, because similar pictures to this can easily be found on various corners of the internet. But at the end of the 1800s, we saw more of a targeted attack on wolves, specifically wolves that were considered to be threats to the livestock industry. Ranching had been growing and growing since the mid-1800s, especially on large swaths of Western lands. And the federal government was supporting ranchers, and they were allowing for the killing of wolves. So in 1893, there was an act that was passed that allowed a bounty to be paid on stock killing predators, so wolves that were killing livestock. Then in 1907, the U.S. Biological Survey and the Department of Agriculture began a campaign to eradicate predators. That was the goal of the campaign. Wolves had been labeled as waste, as vermin, and the goal was to kill as many wolves as possible, as many wolf pups as possible. And unfortunately, it was quite effective. I'm going to move forward just one slide before we go back. So this is from 1907, right as that kind of predator eradication program began. And these are records looking at wolves that were killed in various national forests across the US. We specifically pulled for New Mexico and Arizona because that is where Mexican gray wolves were living. And these are reports of wolves and coyotes that were killed. So you'll see in New Mexico, for example, in the Gila National Forest, 75 wolves were killed, 242 coyotes were killed. As a side note, although we're focusing on Mexican wolves today, we would be remiss if we didn't comment on the fact that coyotes have experienced persecution to even more extreme levels for hundreds of years as well. And they continue to face extreme persecution today, facing killing contests, extreme eradication programs. So we do want to acknowledge that while we're focusing on Mexican gray wolves, we also encourage coexistence with coyotes, a much smaller relative, who are also deserving of respect as well. And so you'll see these extreme killings of wolves. There's also a note that on the Gila National Forest, 36 wolves and 30 coyotes were killed by one forest guard. One den of 8 very young wolf pups was taken or killed on March 13th. So these efforts were looking to kill any wolves they could find, any Mexican gray wolves they could find. And the one of the lead kind of exterminators, trappers, wolfers, whatever you would like to say, Vernon Bailey, was actually recognized by the Department of Agriculture for his contributions to eradicating wolves. And so Mexican gray wolves have a scientific name of Canis lupus bailey, named in honor of Vernon Bailey. So just moving back, so the predator killing continued. You'll see these pictures show people posing with wolf pelts. The bottom left picture shows people standing on top of bison or buffalo skulls. So just this concept of killing wildlife because it belonged to people and it was their right to kill wild animals. And that's something we're still contending with today. And then we saw that in 1976, the last known Mexican gray wolf in the US was killed. And this is a picture on the lower right-hand side that shows that last Mexican gray wolf that was killed, and a trapper received $500 for killing that wolf. And so going from that kind of gory, gruesome, kind of historical past of Mexican gray wolves, while very upsetting, it does set in motion exactly why wolves needed support. They needed protections. They needed the federal government to step in. So we're now going to touch a little bit more on these protections, policies that are in place that have allowed Mexican gray wolves to slowly reestablish themselves in the wild, understanding that more work still needs to be done. So in 1976, Mexican gray wolves were listed as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act itself was signed into law in 1973 by President Nixon. It was a bipartisan law. And under the Endangered Species Act, animals and plants can be listed as endangered or threatened, and they then receive support to hopefully one day come off of that list, meaning they're no longer endangered, they're no longer in need of that federal, those like strict recovery programs, federal support. And the ESA itself has been very successful. 99% of species listed have been saved from extinction. But we still see a lot of work that needs to be done for species that are still in dire need of the support that comes from the federal government. Being listed as an endangered species means that recovery programs are set in place to allow for listed species to hit certain benchmarks. They get funding. So we do see a lot of support that comes with being a federally listed species. But when Mexican gray wolves were listed, the federal government began a program to now save the very wolves that just decades prior they had been slaughtering. So in 1997 or 1977 through 1980, a trapper known as Roy McBride was sent to Mexico to capture any Mexican gray wolves he could find. And he brought 4 Mexican gray wolves back to the US. One of those 5 wolves was a pregnant female. And those wolves were brought into captivity to begin a captive breeding program. And in 1982, that initial recovery plan for Mexican gray wolves was approved. And that recovery plan laid out what that captive breeding effort would look like to rebuild the population. And it also laid out eventually plans for what a potential reintroduction could look like as well. So over the years, those wolves that came from Mexico, known as the McBride founders, the McBride lineage, 3 of those wolves were able to contribute to the captive breeding effort, 2 males and a female. And then years later, in the mid-90s, scientists, thanks to the advance of genetic testing and just various scientific advances, were able to confirm that there were also 2 other lineages of Mexican gray wolves that had been kind of continuing on in captivity. So there was the Ghost Ranch lineage and there was the Aragon lineage. So in total, all Mexican gray wolves alive today descend from 7 genetic founders. So 3 from McBride, 2 from Ghost Ranch, 2 from Aragon. And while it's inspiring that we've been able to grow a species from these very small numbers, it's also concerning because it shows that these wolves alive today descend from a very small genetic pool. And there are many risks that come about with a very related population. We can see inbreeding depression, which could mean smaller litters, lower survival rates. We could see signs of inbreeding, actual physical signs of inbreeding. So we'll touch on this a bit more towards the end of the program. But the ability to regrow a species essentially from those 7 founders is still very inspiring and highlights future efforts as well. And then these 2 pictures are of wolves from the Ghost Ranch lineage coming from the Desert Museum, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. But thanks to the success of that captive breeding effort in 1998, plans were put in place to actually release Mexican gray wolves to what was then known as the Blue Range Recovery Area in the Apache National Forest. The Mexican wolf reintroduction at that point was really playing off of the release of red wolves into North Carolina in the late 1980s, and then also playing off of the success of the more recent Yellowstone reintroduction, which took place in the mid-90s. So 11 wolves were released into the Blue Range Recovery Area. The picture on the top shows the Fish and Wildlife Service, Secretary of the Interior, actually bringing out those 11 wolves to be released. And these were wolves that were born in captivity, grew up in captivity, and were then released. And we often like to think about how exciting it must have been for those wolves to actually be released. They're certainly experiencing a lot of fear. Wolves are afraid of humans, very wary of people. So being in a crate, being surrounded by people is not their ideal, but being released to the wild is everything they were probably dreaming of. And so we also hope the same for the wolves who live at our center. We recognize that although the wild has challenges, it's something every wolf deserves. They deserve to live in the wild and live lives that give back to their ecosystem, but lives that they in turn also benefit from as well. And so when those 11 wolves were released, they were classified as a non-essential experimental population. And this listing can be given to wolves or species in general through Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. And basically that experimental listing shows that these wolves are being released into an area that is outside of their current range because they were extinct in the wild. But it's part of where they did once live historically. And that non-essential designation, because there was a captive breeding component, essentially stated that Mexican wolves in the wild were not essential to the survival of their species because there's a captive component to that. Now, this non-essential versus essential designation is something that the Wolf Conservation Center is pushing for as a change. If anyone has been following our organization for some time or has any of our merch, you'll notice that we often use the phrase, I am essential. Mexican gray wolves are essential because these wolves are crucial to the survival of their species. They have all of the skills of being wild, the knowledge that comes with living in the wild. And so if these wolves were to disappear, it would actually be very devastating to the species as a whole. And so we're always pushing for that designation to be changed. But the designation does provide management flexibility, which means that Mexican gray wolves, even though they are listed as an endangered species, where they're found in the wild, in what is now the experimental population area, no longer known as the Blue Range Recovery Area, they can be killed if they are attacking livestock, if they are caught in the act. And it's frustrating because Mexican gray wolves do share the landscape with livestock. Livestock raising on public lands is very rampant out west, and it poses threats not just to wolves, but to every other species that depends on these western landscapes for survival. So we are still working towards a world where Mexican gray wolves are given full protections and really respected in the wild as well. And so I had mentioned the initial release site as the Blue Range Recovery Area, the experimental population area. And so if you look at this map up here, we pulled this from the Fish and Wildlife Service. It just gives a general idea of that kind of initial release area. And you'll see the northern boundary here of Interstate 40. Mexican gray wolves are not allowed to go beyond that arbitrary boundary. But a few intrepid and trailblazing wolves have traveled north of I-40. And wolves north of I-40 actually have full Endangered Species Act protections. So that 10J listing doesn't come into effect. They are a fully endangered species when they are north of Interstate 40. And we always cheer them on. We love when wolves roam. Areas north of Interstate 40 have really ideal habitat for Mexican gray wolves, areas near the Grand Canyon, the Southern Rockies. So it seems as though they know that as well, and they are making every effort to get there. Today, we have seen a lot of exciting growth in the Mexican gray wolf population. A recent count just a few weeks ago came in estimating that the Mexican gray wolf population in the US is at about 286 wolves. So if you look up at the map, you'll see there's 124 living in Arizona, 162 in New Mexico. These wolves are counted each year through an annual survey census. The interagency field team, which is comprised of a variety of federal agencies, including the Fish and Wildlife Service, variety of state agencies, and tribal agencies as well, They will conduct annual surveys. They will do aerial surveys, and they will track wolves through their collars. So they ideally will have at least 2 wolves per family that are collared. And we actually have some exciting news that Rebecca will get to when she chats a bit more about our captive breeding work, our participation in a program that actually aims to release wolves to the wild. So I will turn things back to you, Leila.
Regan, thank you so much for that foundation. I feel like I can hear it over and over again and continue to learn things from it. And you mentioned some exciting news, and I have to leak a little bit of exciting news to our friends who are watching us today, because we have a Lobo-loving donor who this morning is so excited about Lobo Week and the work that we're doing to shine the light on our Mexican gray wolf friends, that he has offered to match every donation to the Wolf Conservation Center in the next 48 hours, twice. So he will, if you give 25, he'll give 25, up to $25,000. And it's the kind of news that's just so lovely when we get that phone call and someone is that enthusiastic and wants to share their enthusiasm. So I'm putting in that plug now, and we'll probably put a donate button in the chat thing, but just wanted to share that before introducing Rebecca, who's going to take us into boots on the ground, what we're doing right now. So thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Leila. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Bose, and I'm the curator here at the Wolf Conservation Center. Just a little bit about what we do here on site. Like Leila said, it's boots on the ground. I love to say that we don't just talk about it, we do it. So just a little intro into SAFE. That you've heard is several times referred to now. So SAFE, Saving Animals From Extinction, is a program that's under the AZA umbrella. So AZA, as many people are familiar with, is called the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. Some of you who have been following us for a long time know that the Mexican wolf was once designated under a different umbrella called the SSP, or Species Survival Plan. They were recently moved to SAFE, and that is because this is a species that is governed by an outside entity. And in this case, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So there are several endangered animals under the SAFE program, the red wolf as well. And so basically it functions the same way. It just has a different name, and it actually gives us a little more flexibility in how we do things behind the scenes. So going forward, when we refer to SAFE, that's exactly what we're talking about. The SAFE program is designed to manage and breed critically endangered Mexican gray wolves to ensure the long-term sustainability of populations under human care, which directly supports the wild population. We, the Wolf Conservation Center, joined the Mexican wolf program back in 2003. It is a binational program, which means, as Regan alluded to, we also work with partners in Mexico. Currently, there are 36 facilities that reside in the United States and 24 that reside in Mexico. Every year, these facilities get together at an annual meeting, typically in July. Typically, it alternates from the Mexico and the U.S. And at these meetings, husbandry issues are discussed, veterinary issues, population. There's lots of talks from various experts in the field. But it's also where the magic happens, and this is when we put pairs together. The pairings of these wolves, as Regan mentioned, because they're such a small founding pool of animals and that they are genetically related, we have to breed individuals based on their relatedness to one another. And this is done in a computer program. It's essentially an arranged marriage, which doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. So essentially, these animals are in a computer program, and we'll put matches together that look good on paper. Of course, once they meet in person, it doesn't always mean that pups are going to come out of the arrangement, but many times it does. When pups are born, they are assigned a stud book number. So oftentimes you'll hear an animal referred to as, say, F1505. They will also be given a name when they're born. Every facility gives names to their animals, sometimes named by the staff, sometimes named by a donor. So all of our wolves have names, but they also have stud book numbers. And the stud book number is what's attached to their microchip. So whenever an animal is born, they are given a microchip, just like your dog may have a microchip that's put under the skin. It's about the size of a grain of rice. And so when if the animal gets the lucky fortune of being released, and they're captured for to be collared or what have you, they can scan them and determine who they are. And so that microchip is attached to their stud book number. So the Wolf Conservation is currently home to 16 wolves. This number does change from year to year, depending on births and deaths and transfers that might occur. And most of these wolves reside off guest view. So we are extremely lucky to have most of our habitats up the hill, away from our public contact. These animals have very limited human contact. They're cared for. Their basic needs, of course, are met, but we try to limit even staff's time up there to try and give them a very wild existence. They have a natural diet of primarily roadkill deer, sometimes beaver, sometimes fish. So we give them the best chance should they get the call of the wild. We also, as many of you know, rely on our wonderful cameras that I'm sure you've all seen. They're wonderful for you, but they're also wonderful for me as I use them for husbandry and to be able to watch animals that I essentially don't often see in person. Next slide, please. So going back to our boots on the ground conservation, we essentially have a toolbox, so to speak, of techniques that we use to support and promote recovery. There are a number of things that we do here at the center that helps this population as a whole. So there are things such as semen collection, artificial insemination, oocyte vitrification, pup foster to wild, and adult and family releases. All of these encompass tools in our toolbox to be able to support this effort. So I'm going to start with semen collection. That is a live video. Well, it's a video of what sperm look like under the microscope. It's not something everyone sees every day, but right there, that is the future of conservation. Many of you have heard the term frozen zoo. Sadly, it's very accurate and becoming more and more of a thing these days. So every year we try as a program to collect semen from males in the program. And ideal world, we would be collecting from every male in the program, but that's not always possible. So historically, there used to be a team that would travel around the United States prioritizing males. Wolves are monoestrous, meaning they breed only once a year. We are just ending breeding season now. Breeding season is typically late January, February, early March. So that they can prepare to have puppies 63 days later in the spring. So our collection season is actually very small. So for many years, that's what was done, is one team would travel around the country and would face winter storms and plane delays and luggage loss. And so COVID hit and kind of brought everything to a grinding halt. And so we kind of reinvented semen collection and invented or created 3 teams across the United States. There's a team out west that's led by Dr. Bruce Christensen, who is a small animal reproductive vet. There is Karen Bowman, who is our reproductive advisor out at the St. Louis Zoo. And then there is the team here that is now currently being led by the Wolf Conservation Center. We work with Dr. Sherry Asa. She's in the picture on the left looking in the microscope. She was the head of the reproduction program for the Mexican wolf for over 30 years at the St. Louis Zoo. She recently retired and now lives in Vermont. And so we're very lucky to have her in our neck of the woods to help us support this effort. So we have now created what is called the Northeast Reproductive Team that's comprised of Dr. Asa, Luisa Gagliardi. She's in the photo to the right. She is a licensed veterinary technician, also one of our wonderful volunteers here at the center, and then myself. And so the goal of this team is to travel around all the facilities in the Northeast and collect from these males every year. So these facilities include, of course, here at the Wolf Conservation Center, the Beardsley Zoo in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the Stone Zoo in Boston, Massachusetts, Lehigh Valley Zoo in Pennsylvania, and the Utica Zoo up in Utica, New York. So every year, and this just started 2 years ago, so we're still training, we're still learning, but each year now the plan going forward is to spend a week traveling to each facility and collecting from these males. So this not only allows us to collect from more males, it also allows us to maximize what we put in our very, very precious bank that we've been contributing to now for close to 30 years. Next slide, please. Another tool in our fabulous toolbox is artificial insemination. It's something we are working on as a program. It's A lot. We're still trying to learn a lot from it. We're still trying to perfect the process. There are a lot of things to juggle when doing something like this. We are incredibly lucky to have Dr. Chong, who is the chief of theriogenology at the Cornell University School of Veterinary Medicine. He has been working with us now for close to 10 years. Cornell is about 4 hours drive from us, and he, as the head of the reproduction department, is the best we could have to be assisting us with this. So he also works very closely with Dr. Christensen, who's in California. So every year we have been, or most years, not every year, we've been attempting artificial inseminations. This is a program in and of itself, so I'll spare everyone the details, but the different balls in the air we're trying to do this is females and when they ovulate. Do you induce ovulation? Do they ovulate naturally? Then there's the semen that we have in this wonderful bank that I just spoke of. The thawing of the semen, it has to be thawed at a certain temperature, at a certain speed. There's all these factors that have to be taken into consideration for a successful artificial insemination. Since we've sort of restarted this effort, we have not had a success here at the Wolf Conservation Center. There was one puppy born at the Endangered Wolf Center that's also working on it as well several years ago, but we have still ways to go. We do want to be able to utilize these very, very valuable samples that are in our bank, but we don't want to use these samples of wolves that have passed until we have perfected this process. So for now, we are practicing, but of course, every wolf is essential. Every puppy is essential. So any animal that we may be successful with in an artificial insemination, of course, will contribute to the population in a positive way and also could have the potential to be released to the wild. So we are working on it. This year, we did inseminate one of our females, and instead of inducing ovulation, which is something we've done historically, we brought in a male that was vasectomized and used him as an indicator male. So basically, we relied on his behavior towards her to tell us when she might be near ovulating. And it worked. It was, I don't know, for those who followed along, it was very interesting to watch their behavior with one another. But we followed his lead. In order to know when a wolf is about to ovulate, you have to collect blood and run a progesterone level, and that curve in the blood values will tell you when it's time to inseminate. So his behavior shortened our time and limited the number of times we had to collect blood, because of course every time we have to handle a wolf is a stressful event. So stay tuned for the spring, fingers and paws crossed that we have puppies on the horizon from not only our natural pairings but our artificial insemination. Next slide. Another thing that we do is called oocyte vitrification. Some of you may know this wolf in the photo. This is F1226, also known as Belle. And those are her ovaries in the bag in the photo on the right. So when a female wolf in the Mexican wolf program reaches the end of her reproductive age, which is typically between 10 and 12 years old, we spay them. So just like you spay your dog, we spay them. Same procedure. It's done by one of our wonderful veterinarians. Once she is spayed, the veterinarian will remove specifically the ovaries from the uterus. They have to be maintained at a certain temperature to get to their destination so that they're viable. So the photo on the right is an image of literally her ovary was placed in a moistened gauze and then put in an equitator, which is kept at a certain temperature. They have to be kept warm. We get a courier that's usually waiting at the hospital. We hand him the ovaries. He goes to the airport. The ovaries catch their plane and they go to the St. Louis Zoo. Once they arrive at the St. Louis Zoo, there's a team waiting that then take them, and then they do a procedure to extract their oocytes. These oocytes are then frozen. We have yet to actually utilize these oocytes, but again, going back to the term frozen zoo, these will be useful at some point in the future for research and or future breedings, but we have been doing this now for a very long time, so our bank of oocytes is pretty considerable. So every female that comes to us, or every female in the program, should ideally go through this procedure, because once that animal passes on, she will live on through what she's given to our banks. Next slide. Foster to Wild, another fabulous tool in this virtual toolbox. So basically what this is, when a captive litter is born at a facility, if there is a corresponding wild litter of similar age, we will literally take pups from the facility and fly them out to the wild, to New Mexico and or Arizona, and put them in a wild den. It sounds crazy. It is crazy. It's effective and it works. Wolves always accept puppies. I have had the privilege of going on several of these at this point. These puppies have to be placed in a wild den before their eyes open, which is typically before they reach the age of 10 to 14 days old. We are the furthest facility from the wild, so we tend to wait until they're slightly older of that so that we can. I was just looking. I hope you can still hear me. Okay. So that we can, so they're a little stronger so we can get them to the wild. So we have now done this in 2019, 2022, 2023, and 2024. We've put a total of 12 puppies in the wild during these 4 years, and perhaps we will have another chance to do it again this year. These wolves, the benefit of doing this, it's extremely labor intensive. There's a lot of resources, money, time. These wolves are raised wild. They have no human experience. They have not seen a human being. They're raised by a wild wolf, and it really gives them the best platform to be able to be a wild wolf. We work with a private aviation not-for-profit called Lighthawk. Some of you may have heard of them. I can't say enough about them. Basically, this is an aviation organization comprised of volunteer pilots and their planes that fly for environmental causes. And the Mexican Wolf Program and the Red Wolf Program, two programs they work very closely with. We couldn't not do this without Lighthawk. They've been instrumental in us being able to get these pups to the wild quickly and safely. Can't imagine flying these wolves on commercially, though it's been done. Just some images to share with you. On the left, it's Dr. Charlie Duffy, one of our longtime vets. So what happens is very, very early the morning of, this is probably 3 or 4 a.m. We go, if we have the benefit of using our cameras, if she happens to be in the den with our camera, we'll watch for nursing so that they have one last full belly of colostrum and all the necessary nutrients they need. Then we'll pull them. They get an exam by our veterinarian, and we pack them up and meet the plane. We have an airport very close by, and then we get on the plane, and typically we have to stop to refuel. And we fly to New Mexico or Arizona, depending on where the den is designated for them to go. This is the middle picture. That's Dr. Renee Beja, another one of our longtime veterinarians. The wonderful benefit of having a private plane is that it's ours. We can use it to feed the pups, stimulate them to go to the bathroom. At this age, the mother would stimulate them, so we have to do that for them. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to keep them well and warm until they get to where they need to go. Once we land, a team with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is waiting to greet us with their veterinarians, and we typically jump in pickup trucks and head out to the wild. It can be anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5 hour drive, depending on where the den is. The photo on the right was taken last year at the most recent foster we did. Those are all wild puppies mixed in with the puppies that we brought. So biologists, they locate the dens because the parents typically have collars, and they can determine if they are denning based on their movements. When wolves start to localize and stay in one area, it typically means that they are denning. Of course, once they get out there could be no den, there could be no puppies. So it is a bit of a wild card. Usually, especially with New York, we have a backup den in case for whatever reason the first den is not useful. A biologist will go down into the den, take out all the puppies. They will all get an exam. The wild puppies will also get a microchip. The captive puppies will get a microchip. They will rub them all together with their own urine and feces so that they smell like one another, and they'll put them back in the den. Once the biologists vacate the area, they will leave camera traps and can then monitor the pack using the camera traps. Parents always come back and they always accept the puppies. And I don't know how many people, if you have one child and you come home and have 4, would be okay with it, but wolves are. So like I said, it's a great tool in our conservation toolbox to be able to put wolves back on the landscape, to increase numbers, and also be able to inject different genetics. I do want to highlight one very special wolf. You probably heard the name Slides. He was named by the Great Wolf Lodge. Thank you. The next slide. Slides, no pun intended. His stud book number is M2821. He was fostered to the wild in 2023, and he was collared, and we are able to follow him. So of the 12 pups that we have put in the wild, he is the only known surviving pup. I like to believe that there are others out there. They've just eluded the efforts of the Fish and Wildlife Service to track them. But he has been collared, so we are able to follow him. He does have a GPS collar, so you also can follow him. There is a website, which we can share, where you can track him, not live, because for his safety, we obviously don't want to publicize where he is, but it is delayed. So it is real time, just slightly delayed. I highly recommend everybody go and check it out. It's a very cool thing to watch, and it's why we are here. We're here to put these wolves back in the landscape, and he is living the dream right now. So we're hoping that he pairs, has pups of his own, and his offspring go on to lead the efforts of recovering this wolf. One more slide for me. And lastly, I also want to talk about adult releases. We have done 3 so far in the history of the Wolf Conservation Center. The 3 wolves have been F838, F836 in the US, and the M1141 in Mexico. Currently, the US Fish and Wildlife Service is not releasing adults or adult families. They're just focusing on fostering efforts. But I do want to highlight one wolf, F838. Anybody that comes here or knows about us knows about this wolf. She was our first release to the wild as an adult. She joined the Wolf Center back in November of 2004 as a yearling with her 3 sisters from a facility out in Minnesota. In 2005, we got the request that she was wanted to be put back out to the wild landscape. When wolves come here, like I said, most of them reside off guest view. They have a very wild existence. They eat what they're supposed to eat, primarily white-tailed deer. It really gives them a good foundation to be able to prepare for the wild. So she spent some time here, and then we transferred her to the Sevieta National Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico. There is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pre-release facility there where she spent some time first. They usually tend to go to a pre-release facility, which is also even more remote than we are. They visit them even less, but they're treated as wild as possible within the confines of captivity. There she was paired with a mate, M806, and in April of 2006, they had 2 puppies. So they were called the Meridian Pack. All the different packs out in New Mexico and Arizona have different names. They were the Meridian Pack, and they were placed in a soft release pen in Arizona in July 2006. Soft release, there's sort of 2 ways that wolves as adults or families are released. One is a hard release where they literally open the gate, open their crates and let them go. A soft release is when they put them in a pen, but the pen is made of mesh or something that they could ideally get out of in 5 minutes if they really wanted to. But it's called a soft release because the wolves then choose when they're ready to be released. Some wolves take days to be released. Some go instantly. So she was offered a soft release, and within 24 hours or so, they did release themselves. So they Fish and Wildlife will sometimes supplementally feed wolves in the location where they're released to kind of give them a little bit of a foundation while they get their bearings. So I'll never forget it. I've been here for 25 years. It's definitely a major milestone for us as an organization for the Mexican Wolf Program. But unfortunately, it doesn't come with a happy ending. She was tragically shot and killed in September of 2006. And the father, or the male that she was paired with, did go on to pair with another female, which eventually started what was called the Blue Stem Pack. They did have pups, so he did get to go and move forward and pass on his genetics. Unfortunately, he was ultimately found dead. As anybody who follows wolves and follows them closely knows, that it ends with a lot of tragedy, which is unfortunate. But she did, like Regan said, she had a chance to be wild. Even if it's for a short time, that is what we wish for all the wolves that come through the center, or any wolves that are in these programs. So that is where my portion ends, and I will pass on to Regan.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. So as Rebecca mentioned, stories don't always end well, at least not well as how we would define it. But that's something we're working to change. We believe strongly that we do everything we can for these wolves when they're here at our center. But we also want to make sure we're doing everything we can to ensure that they're safe in the wild, and that when we talk about them living successful lives, it's not just success because they're contributing to an arbitrary number that means they're a recovered species. We want these wolves to live successful lives because they're individuals, because they deserve to have these amazing, fulfilling, enriching lives. So we are working towards a better world for wolves. And we think one of the best ways to do this is by combining education and by combining advocacy and giving people the tools they need to make sure they are effective advocates advocates for wolves, that they know what information is being given, when this information is being discussed publicly, so they can have a voice. And we also believe in justice. And Rebecca mentioned that F838 was poached. She was shot and killed. Mexican gray wolves are a protected species. You cannot shoot them. Unfortunately, many Mexican gray wolves are poached every single year. In 2023, 30 Mexican gray wolves were found dead. 11 of those wolves were poached. So we know it's a problem, and this is something that we want to hold people accountable for. So the Wolf Conservation Center last year, along with our partners at Western Watersheds Project, actually sponsored a billboard advertising a reward fund for anyone who turned in information about those Mexican wolf poachers. The reward fund is over $100,000, and it's supported by federal agencies, state agencies, and a variety of conservation partners like the Wolf Conservation Center. We firmly believe that if we don't hold people accountable, poaching isn't going to stop. We need to show that the law will be enforced, that Mexican gray wolves are worth defending, and that you will be in trouble if you do kill a Mexican gray wolf or any endangered animal. But we are also working with what we think is the most exciting group of people. We're working with the next generation of voters. We're working with kids, working with students, and helping them understand and appreciate wolves as well. We have a few exciting collaborations in the works. We're working currently with a school in Arizona, helping them better learn about Mexican gray wolves, learn about wolves in general. And we're helping them feel more comfortable talking to others about the science behind why wolves are essential as a keystone species. We're helping them better understand and connect to wolves as families. Wolves live in family groups just like we do. And so we're building an empowered and empathetic group of people who over the next few years will hopefully continue taking that love of wolves to their communities, to their elected officials, and will create a world where wolves are not viewed as just numbers, but they're viewed as thinking, feeling beings. And so, you know, something else we're also focusing on is compassionate conservation, recognizing that while we're working to save a species, we also can't forget about the individual. Individuals have very important roles to play. So one Mexican gray wolf who's released, while the release is part of a bigger goal of helping their species, again, hit those recovery goals, we also want to make sure that individual wolf is living the best life possible. So we want to tell their story and connect people to these wolves that are making history. But of course, also looking forward, we are fighting for you know, the best available science to inform recovery plans. We would love to see Mexican wolves moving north of Interstate 40, and, you know, living in the Grand Canyon region, living in the Southern Rockies. In order for Mexican gray wolves to truly thrive, they need a metapopulation. Independent scientists say this could be about 750 wolves living in 3 different populations in the US. The habitat is there. The wolves are clearly working towards it with their travels north of I-40. And so we hope that allowing for them to wander, and, you know, combined with that and releases can also help fix some of these genetic challenges that we're concerned with, and just, again, make a better world for wolves. But with that, I'm going to toss things back over to Leila to share some of our exciting plans as well.
Thank you, Regan. And we have some really terrific questions coming in. And I want to be sure that we have time to answer as many as we can online. And for those that we don't, we'll certainly give you the answer in the chat. You know, for looking forwards for us, we have breeding wolves on site. And so we are hoping that we will have wolf pups in the spring. And you will certainly hear if we do. We're going to just continue to lead with innovation. And there are a couple of questions that speak to our partnership. So, you know, the more people that we are working with, the stronger we are. And that's true not only of our individual supporters like you, but of organizations that share the same passion that we do. And, you know, together we can do this. We just have to stay together. And we need to unite and speak in a voice that can be heard. And I really do believe that through our efforts to educate next generation and adults and to share inspiration about stories like the Mexican gray wolf and its fragile recovery, but it is happening. And so, we look ahead with confidence, we look ahead with enthusiasm, and we look ahead with gratitude for you and for everything that you do for us. But I'm going to turn to some questions now and see. I think the first one is a good one to follow up, Regan, with you, which is talking about the kind of partnerships. Do you partner with organizations like the International Wolf Center or other organizations? Why don't you describe a little bit about the way that we try to unify our voice and make it stronger?
Sure. So yes, we work with a variety of organizations at a variety of levels because just like a wolf pack, we think we're stronger and more effective when we work together. And so we, for a variety of wolf species, work with organizations that are maybe local to those communities. They can best understand the needs and the challenges of people who are living in those areas. They share amazing insight. But we also work with larger, more nationally based groups, working with schools, scientists. I think the most effective approach to creating a better world for wolves is using every tool in the toolbox. And that means working with people who have a variety of experiences, a variety of skill levels, and all working towards a common goal, which is, again, a better world.
Thank you. We have a question about our area here, which is Rebecca, probably best for you to chime in on, about the off-exhibit wolf enclosures. And you mentioned how we keep it as wild as we can. How maybe you can talk a little bit more about that process. You're on mute there.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yes, excellent question. So we have approximately 30 acres here, and most of it is for the wolves, which is the way it should be. The enclosures that Leila are talking about are up sort of on our hillside. We have to follow certain protocols when it comes to how these wolves are housed. When we first joined these two programs, we had to have a certain gauge fence. It has to be a certain height. There has to be a dig barrier or ground apron so that they can't, if they chose to attempt to dig out, there has to be a double fencing with a corridor. So if God forbid they get out one fence, there's still a secondary fence should that be needed. We have part of each enclosure is called a service pen. So it's a smaller area with a roof that contains what we call our capture boxes. So when we do have to catch these wolves for health checks or what have you, we use these service pens as a tool to be able to catch them. So every enclosure is approximately an acre in size. Every enclosure has a dividing line down the center. This dividing line cuts the enclosure in half. For much of the year, the wolves have access to both sides, so they have the full acre. But there are times when we will have to close the house. So breeding season, for example, if we have a pair or a pack that comprises of a family, so parents and pups or younger wolves that shouldn't be breeding, we'll put males on one side, females on the other for the duration of the breeding season. If we have a storm coming, we'll utilize one half or the other to prepare for that. If a tree comes down, so having the ability to have the enclosures with the dividing line is a huge tool when we have to manage them. Each enclosure, like Leila said, is natural. They're in the woods. They have natural stone walls. We try to keep the invasive species down as much as possible. It's a never-ending task. But there are trees and bushes. We do provide them with naturalistic dens to look natural, so that, for instance, if a wolf is released to the wild from our facility and we had a picnic table in there for them to get on top of, we don't want that wolf to see a picnic table as, oh, I remember that in my home in New York. So we try to have everything in there as natural as possible so that they don't get used to anything human related. Same thing with their diet. We cannot feed them anything livestock related, so they only get a very strict diet of roadkill deer. And like I said, occasionally if we're lucky to get some beaver or also fish, but they do eat, I'd say 98% of the time they are eating deer. Of course, they get water. In the summertime, we give them tubs so they could get in. Some of the wolves ignored them. Some like to, I've seen wolves kind of submerge themselves in the tubs. I'm trying to think if I've left anything out, but yeah, hopefully if I didn't answer anything that you were expecting, please let me know.
Thank you, Rebecca. We've got time for one more question and then a close opportunity. And so, Rebecca, Regan, I think about the question that we ask ourselves here a lot, and I saw it come through, which is, with the current environment, how do we make sure that we keep moving forwards? And I know you do such a great job presenting advocacy opportunities to people, but I think we could all use a feeling of empowerment right now. So if you can just share a go-to or a how to get done thing, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So there are many ways to feel as though you're actively working towards a better world, even if there might be bigger challenges or bigger hurdles. So Dana, one of our wonderful staff members, has been posting in the chat links to our Action Alert Center. Right now, there are 2 bills that were actually just discussed in the House Committee on Natural Resources this morning. One of those bills would reinstate the 2020 delisting rule for gray wolves. The other would call for really horrible actions to the Endangered Species Act and would effectively gut our nation's most bedrock environmental law. So we do encourage you to reach out to your representatives, asking them to vote no on these bills. But we're also seeing, with everything going on, that this is exactly why we also need to be involved at the state level. So getting involved with your state wildlife agencies, attending wildlife commission meetings, even if your state doesn't have wolves, like for example, New York at the moment doesn't have any known populations of wolves, but we know wolves could get here in the future. So getting involved now is very important. You're setting yourself up, building these relationships, and other species need support as well. We had mentioned coyotes earlier. Coyotes live in every single state. And so if you're wanting to maybe create a better world for wolves to someday come into, let's start making sure that we have better appreciation and respect for coyotes. We're already sharing the landscape with much smaller cousins of wolves, and we need to be able to coexist with coyotes before we, try to open the doors to having wolves come in as well. But if all of that is too intimidating and you still want to contribute, studies show that the best way to combat misinformation is by you speaking out against it. And people are more likely to listen and read new information if it's coming from people they know. So if you are interacting with people on social media or coworkers or just general friends, and you hear that they are saying something that is untrue about wolves, give them the correct information, share resources, because over time, if we're building a more informed and well-educated group of people who understand that there's no reason to kill wolves, that wolves benefit ecosystems, we are then able to go on the offense, and we can be much more strategic with the way we are approaching recovery for wolves.
Thank you, Regan. And we're going to be very mindful of everyone's time today. And I think the most exciting thing that I know we are working towards, you have heard about today, which is continuing to do work on the ground, continuing to educate, continuing to advocate, and also to provide a new home for the Wolf Conservation Center, which is a project that we are going to break ground on in September. And is going to allow what is currently a campus that can only have people in occasionally because literally there is nowhere to park, to a place that we can have open to the public 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and invite people in to be part of this community. We'll have a rich virtual program as well as some wonderful on-site programs. And what I'm looking forward to most is overnight opportunities with howling wolves. So we have so many things to talk about and share that is happening now, groundbreaking in September, and continuing our incredible work here. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And this is the beginning of what I hope will be other conversations that we get to have with you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.